Thank you everyone for being here this evening. And I'd like to thank especially the Allen Public Library and Tom Keener for inviting me to speak tonight. And as he said, I'm going to discuss the Spanish artist Teresa Lanceta, whose work is the subject of the current exhibition at the Meadows Museum here in Dallas at SMU. The exhibition will be open until June 16th, so please be sure to go soon. So has anyone visited the Meadows Museum? Has anyone been there before? Okay, excellent. For those who have not been, I'll just give a brief overview of the history of the museum, its founder, and the collection itself. So during business trips to Spain in the 1950s, Texas philanthropist and oil businessman Alger H. Meadows would spend hours at the Prado Museum in Madrid. Maybe especially since he would stay at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel right across the street from the museum. The Prado's spectacular collection of Spanish masterpieces inspired Meadows to begin his own collection of Spanish art. In 1962, through the Meadows Foundation, he gave Southern Methodist University funds for the construction and endowment of a museum to house his Spanish collection. The museum opened in 1965, and in the years that followed, Meadows provided the funds for an aggressive but highly selective acquisitions program, which is how such an extraordinary collection was developed in a very short period of time. Here, I would also like to show some of the highlights from the museum, some of my personal favorites, and note that since 1978, the Meadows has nearly doubled its collection of paintings. The foundation gave a gift in 1998 for construction of a new museum building on campus, which opened in March of 2001. So now, the current temporary exhibition at the Meadows is Meadows Arco Artist Spotlight, Teresa Lanceta. Teresa is the second artist selected as a part of this Meadows Arco partnership, or MAS. This program was established in 2019 and is a 6-year partnership between the Meadows Museum and Fundación Arco, the leading organization behind Spain's premier contemporary art fair, Arco Madrid. The first artist featured was conceptual artist Ignasi Abai. Through a double-juried process, MAS selects one contemporary Spanish artist with limited recognition in the US biennially and presents their work at the Meadows. A key component of the program is the artist's visit to Dallas. Here you can see Ignasi's work that was installed at the Meadows. This project was called Palabras Vacías, or Empty Words, and that is his work from 2020. I was very lucky to be able to spend time with Teresa during her week in Dallas, and I got to see how the exhibition was installed. It was incredibly special to see each work as it was rolled out and hung, and to see the texture and technique of each piece up close. Teresa is also an incredibly humble and kind artist, and she's very modest. And she also has quite a number of interviews and videos on YouTube, so you can see her. And here are her works installed in the Meadows galleries. And this is her first exhibition in Texas, and the first by a textile artist at the Meadows, after having received, recently won Spain's National Prize for Fine Arts. So a little bit about the artist. Teresa was born in Barcelona and studied history and completed a PhD in art history at the Universidad Complutense in Madrid. She attended university there amidst the intense and tumultuous landscape of the 1968 global protests and student-led political organizing. By the early 1970s, she was living and working with the Romani population of Barcelona's Raval district, making important connections with the women of the community. And from that time, the artist opted for weaving as a form of artistic expression, constantly blurring the boundaries between what is considered art and what is craft. And we will come back to this throughout the presentation, this idea of art versus craft. Now, throughout her career, Teresa spent long periods of time in Alicante, Granada, Madrid, Seville, and Marrakesh, which you can see on this map. She has also taught at the School of Architecture in Alicante and at the Escola Massana in Barcelona. I'll expand upon the themes and issues that come up in Teresa's work, as well as some of the cultural and social questions that she has wrestled with. I will say that to begin, Teresa's work is informed by historical as well as living textile traditions. She's interested in the elements of formal exploration, but also in material and technical matters, and in the traditions and ways of life associated with weaving. Through textiles, Teresa has met and spent time with different societal groups, such as I mentioned, the Romani people in Spain, and Moroccan nomadic weavers, incorporating their artistic traditions and ways of life in a dialogue with her own tapestries, paintings, and drawings, as well as her teaching. Both Spain and Morocco have been instrumental in shaping her exploration of what has traditionally been women's work, as well as the nonverbal communication of stories and emotional bonds in different communities. So this is her series called El Raval. It's Teresa's most recent work, and it consists of colorfully painted and sewn fabric and introduces strongly contrasting colors to her body of work. The pieces are inspired by the neighborhood of El Raval in Barcelona. This is a neighborhood that used to be called Barrio Chino, or Chinatown, and it currently has a very diverse immigrant community. About half of its population was born abroad, including Filipinos, South Americans, and Pakistanis, and a more recent Eastern European community, especially from Romania. Although these works were created during the pandemic, they are partially informed by her long experience in Barcelona and her time there in the 70s and throughout her life. In one interview, Teresa said, "Weaving turned my attention away from the more groundbreaking art forms that dominated the early 70s, such as conceptual art. I appreciated how far-reaching the proposals of conceptual art were, especially in Catalonia, but I wanted to be elsewhere. Weaving raised other issues, and it was something people did all over the world and across all eras. It was collective and popular. I was quite sure I wouldn't find any answers in the art of those years." So why use these colors? What do they mean? Teresa has said that red, this is a quote, "red holds life and vies with black. They're opposites, but not because black denotes death. It does not. But because black is a lightless arcanum we feel compelled to penetrate, like a secret. The contrasting red and black triangles also happen to be the flag used by CNT, or the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo, which in English is the National Confederation of Labor. It's a Spanish confederation of anarcho-syndicalist labor unions, which was long affiliated with the International Workers Association, or AIT, and historically, it has played a major role in the Spanish labor movement. Now, Teresa said this association is not intentional, but she does recognize its meanings and doesn't see a problem. Teresa buys and often thrifts a lot of her materials to maintain complete autonomy over her work and the selection process. Her weaving and collage techniques, which for this series involves painting, again, and sewing pieces together, emulates the streets and urban design of Las Ramblas in Barcelona, which is one of its busiest and most famous streets, with lots of vendors and today many tourists. Some of you may have walked down Las Ramblas. But you can see here in the way she stitches that sometimes these can be evocative of different streets coming together or neighborhoods connecting. Some of these works transport you to Gaudí and his mosaics, featuring flags and geometric abstraction. Additionally, Teresa is interested in viewing her work from a child's perspective, something that she has mentioned in the context of the immigrant families she has been able to work with in the Raval neighborhood. And here we see an installation view from Barcelona. This was a different exhibition, but you can really get a sense of those mosaics and that tile connecting. The Spanish term jarapa refers to a multicolored textile, which she creates by knitting with actual cloth pieces bought at flea markets or donated by friends and family. See in this detail, we can see here, these are actually buttons that she just didn't take off the piece of cloth that she was using to sew. And you can see here the end of a zipper too. And in some areas you can see a little tag or different pieces of material that were not discarded and just become part of the work. One thing that really stands out about Teresa's working process is that she does everything on her own without a workshop or assistant, since, again, she wants to control the entire process. Given how labor-intensive weaving can be, it has just struck me, since we're in a time when many artists working at her level often produce work in collaboration with studio assistants. And this is her gallerist, Mira Bernabeu, here explaining some of her process and how she works. On this topic of work and repetitive motion, I want to share some words by Teresa from an interview from a few years ago. And you can read along here, and I quote, "I fell into weaving because of its hypnotic motion and its hold on time, and I did so totally and utterly beyond results and consequences. In return, it has helped me penetrate unitary time, an expanded time that suffuses life and daily routines, a complete time, if you will. Weaving is a structural process that enables the simultaneous creation of language and object. It is a form of speech, but above all, it is the human revelation of an arcanum, again, like a secret revealed." Here I want to show how Teresa's work can be installed. This is not at the Meadows, but this was a recent exhibition in Barcelona and Valencia. Her work is often shown with both the front and the back visible to viewers. And that really enables us as viewers to see the complete weaving process. She's very visible and transparent in this way. And reflecting on her time living in the Raval neighborhood, and that's the inspiration for these works, she said, "Was I happy? I don't remember now. Happiness wasn't in my plans. Although if I wasn't happy, it wasn't because of the biting cold or the sweltering heat or the cramped living quarters or the lack of money. And if I was, it would have something to do with the flamenco way of life. To live and to be was what I wanted. To live like a gitana, or like a Romani, and to be just that and nothing more." So you can slowly start to get a sense of who the artist is. Now, a fascinating aspect of this series, and this piece on the left is in the exhibition, is its nod to the iconic sidewalk tiles of Barcelona. The city boasts over 20 types of tiles, but one stands out as a symbol, and that's the panot, commonly known as the flower of Barcelona. This four-petaled flower, with its inverted relief made of cement, sand, and water, has become a popular souvenir. You can see it on magnets, on keychains, necklaces, and even sometimes on tattoos. At the beginning of the 20th century, Barcelona was plagued by muddy streets, earning the nickname Can Fanga, or mud house in Catalan. To address this, there was a commission that approved sidewalk improvements, leading the city council to organize a competition to supply and pave the city with panots. Casa Escofet, which was a ceramic flooring company, won the contract in 1916. While the flower tile is the most beloved, the company also introduced 4 other designs: a skull, concentric circles, and 4 pills with 4 circles, all of which can still be seen throughout Barcelona. And I think this appears, and here you can see her sort of nodding to this repeating tile form. I think this appears in Teresa's work as a sign of her identity and closeness with a specific place, here, of course, Barcelona. I think it's an important symbol and imprint to how she identifies as an artist as well, by taking this common street symbol and embedding it into her woven work. Okay, now we're going to move on to the other series, which is featured in the exhibition. And this series was inspired by 16th century carpets. Teresa's work, as I mentioned, is highly informed by her interest in historic weaving traditions and techniques. And for this series, the artist was inspired by the Muslim craftsmen who worked in Spain during the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, to provide some historical context, in 1492, Spain marked a significant change with the defeat of Granada, completing the Christian so-called Reconquista or reconquest, and ending centuries of Muslim rule in the Iberian Peninsula. This victory was followed by the Alhambra Decree, which expelled Jews who refused to convert to Christianity. The Christian rulers then focused on consolidating their power and enforcing religious unity, leading to the forced conversion or expulsion of Muslims. By 1609-1614, this culminated in the expulsion of the Moriscos. These were descendants of Muslims who had already converted to Christianity, but were suspected of secretly practicing Islam. These actions drastically altered Spain's religious and cultural landscape. And I just want to point out here the map of Castilla and León. Here's the Kingdom of Granada, which, as we know, was defeated in 1492. This is one example of the rugs. Teresa has not cited this one specifically, but it is made after 1416, and it's part of the Hispanic Society's collection, currently installed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art under a beautiful so-called mudéjar wooden ceiling. So it's definitely worth a trip to see. Now, for this series, Teresa made drawings and weavings, which are both shown at the Meadows right now. As inspiration for this drawing, Teresa researched a rare 15th century carpet now at the Detroit Institute of Art. Even while the Christian kingdoms of Spain, led by Castile and Aragon, were pushing Muslim rulers out of the Iberian Peninsula, the Spanish elite developed a taste for the beautiful products made by Muslim craftsmen, like these stunning carpets. Some feature small geometric shapes in the center, and sometimes the coat of arms of noble owners. These carpets were often huge. This one is over 18 feet long, and added warmth and elegance to palace floors. Many of these carpets survived because they were donated to Spanish convents and later ended up in the art market and private collections around 1900. Now, the Spanish word for rug is alfombra, and that comes from the Arabic alhombra, meaning mat. Rugs were highly valued goods, and again, even after their expulsion, Muslim craftsmen continued to work on Christian soil, creating pieces for royalty, aristocracy, and the church. The wealthy admired and patronized a culture that they also harassed and persecuted, highlighting the recurring theme of valuing objects and art while repudiating their creators. Here we see an important example of these carpets from the Philadelphia Museum of Art. For Teresa, these rugs embody a rich urban landscape and context, symbolizing the subjugation of mudéjar weavers and their culture. Despite being Muslim, these weavers were born in territories later called Spain and were commissioned to make rugs with Christian coats of arms. Teresa sees this as a reflection of a culture that was defeated, but which, while it lasted, she says, shone bright. Now, the importance of ornamentation in her work is paramount. She immerses herself in these rugs through their ornament, using it to express relationships among different elements and to create a network that connects the knots in a system of repetition, which we can see here all throughout this one. It's not about isolating patterns, but connecting them into a whole that extends really beyond just the physical limits of the rug. And here we see an example from the Art Institute of Chicago. Much of her work, again, identifies with the weavers and preserves the memory of others. She notes that the octagon in her work is slightly flattened and distorted, constrained by the historical context of Christian dominance, reflecting her interpretation of this cultural tension. Spanish rugs are often patterned with octagons, a shape that in Islamic art and architecture represents a blend of symbolic meaning, geometric precision, and aesthetic beauty. Teresa also recognizes there is an added level of pain, I think, since these rugs have left the regions for which they were produced and have ended up in many American collections, as we have seen, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, New York, completely devoid of any historic and geographic context. It's almost like a total abstraction of their histories. And here you can see this octagon pattern and how Teresa has slightly flattened this, I think, as the constraint of the people. Here I'd just like to show also how, again, in some installations, you can see the back of the weaving. And it's fascinating how it has this sort of unfinished quality to it. But the point, again, is not perfection. It's really transparency and a whole language of weaving. The work that inspired the weavings shown here, and I should note, these were featured at a recent exhibition in Valladolid, which I luckily got to see in April. The inspiration was a medieval work at the MNAC, or the Museo Nacional in Catalunya. This panel comes from the grave of Sancho Sánchez Carrillo and his wife Juana in the church of San Andrés de Mahmud in the region of Burgos. They were made around 1295, at the time in which the burial permission was given. This piece is a part of an extraordinary ensemble from the early Castilian Gothic style, from which only 8 panels survive, most of them at the MNAC. There are 4 panels with mourners or weepers, which you see here, and 2 panels with heraldry shields, one with a scene of the Virgin Mary, and the last with a scene of the crucifixion. The weepers are dressed in the traditional striped mourning clothes, and they cry intensely. They pull their hair out, and they even scratch their own faces to bleed in order to show their sorrow. And that's right here. Not sure if any of you have seen this work in person in Barcelona, but it's very striking. And that's the inspiration for this right here. Teresa was thinking about how weaving crossed religious boundaries in the 13th century. The 3 religions of medieval Spain, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, were all connected through textile workshops. And this was a real, tangible, documented site of what is called convivencia, which is a academically difficult term, but in English translates to coexistence, living together of these 3 faiths. And I should note, not always peacefully. Here, I really like that you get a sense of Teresa's process and that she has no pretensions of hiding any mistakes. Teresa wrote that, quote, "Life is rather like staring at something you can barely see, and that weaving permits a hypnotic gaze. Time is dilated, suspended, ecstatic. I compare it to prayer. We have lost prayer, we have ceased to believe. When I see someone in prayer, I feel a certain yearning. But I'm not a believer, and since I don't believe, I can't pray, practice yoga, or meditate. But repetitive actions like weaving come close to prayer." And reflecting on mistakes, she said, "Weaving does not allow for any corrections of mistakes or any deviations from the initial compositional plan, which can be elevated to the category of a moral lesson one must not forget. I see working a loom like life itself. What is done, and one has to live with it." And here I think we can see that she really embodies that radical transparency, not covering up mistakes or leaving threads hanging. No pretensions, again, of perfection. She wants you to see this. She wants to be transparent about her process. Here you can see that again. I took a weaving course in front of these objects, and the woman, the artist who was leading the course, said as a weaver, she could identify what she would consider to be some mistakes, but that really in the context of these works they're not considered technical mistakes. They're just part of the work of art. Now we're going to move to Teresa's work that is based on her time in Morocco, where she traveled extensively from 2009 to 2015. And even before that, in the 80s, she had also traveled there. 1982 marked Teresa's first interaction with the Dutch anthropologist, scholar, and collector Bert Flint and his in-depth scholarship on Afro-Berber arts. Their travels through the Middle and High Atlases introduced her to the region's women weavers and their ancestral techniques. What Bert Flint found in the weavings surprised him. Minimalist fabrics without center or theme, and highly colorful abstractions understood as pure exploration of the line in space. Teresa decided to explore this ancestral knowledge with a productive purpose, but also a social and community one, which we'll see throughout this series. And here is just kind of where she was visiting, here in the Middle Atlas. This collection of work represents 4 regions in Morocco with a focus on the Middle Atlas, though there are also works inspired by traditions in the High Atlas, the Anti-Atlas, and the Plain of Marrakesh. Teresa also participated in an exhibition where her works were shown alongside those of Moroccan women. The artist has tried to adhere to the format and colors of the Moroccan canon, and also minimizing her personal style in some of the pieces. I should note right away that Moroccan rug is a broad term encompassing many different types of rugs. The weaving techniques differ among tribes, regions, and villages. Because the craft is passed down from elders, each tribe or region's style reflects its unique climate, needs, and customs. For instance, artisans in the snowy Atlas Mountains create thicker rugs than those in the desert. And this diversity is especially evident in every aspect, from the animals providing the wool and the dye to the local symbols and traditions presented in the designs. Now, in the mid-80s, she initiated a project based on the source fabrics of Moroccan craftswomen, creating tapestries guided by traditional Middle Atlas weaving. This body of work was showcased in 3 significant exhibitions. The first is this first one on the left, called La Alfombra Roja, or the Red Carpet, and that took place at the Textile Museum in Barcelona in 1989. This is her earliest and most influential work, inspired again by her trip to the Middle Atlas. In this work, she immerses herself in a tradition she doesn't inherit, but tries to understand and decipher its language and method. This complex journey reflects her vision and experience. She falls in love with its geometry and tries to present it in small pieces, focusing on fragments to understand parts before seeing the whole. And these are 4 different pieces. The second is Tejidos Marroquíes, which is here, or Moroccan textiles, and that was held at the Museo Nacional Centro de Arte Reina Sofía in Madrid and in Rabat in 2000. And the third, Adiós al Rombo, or Goodbye to the Rhombus, was displayed in Madrid, Bilbao in 2016, and the 2017 Venice Biennale. Each exhibition highlighted the unique dimensions of the artist's practice at that time, and it's offered a profound meditation on material inheritance and the transmission of visual codes across time and space. Often in her work, Teresa wants to highlight the creative thinking and the individuality of the craftsman, because within such a vast body of work, thanks to the repetition and traditional techniques, the originality and differentiation of the pieces can sometimes be lost and then seen again in small details. Personally, I think this identification can really only be achieved when you spend a lot of time close looking at those weavings in order to get a real sense of the language and a grasp on the technique. In other words, you need a lot of experience and a lot of time. Teresa has commented on the fascination she felt when discovering a unique piece of textile in a bazaar, which helped her recognize the role of the artist and differentiation through repetition. She also contemplates the value of time and labor, particularly for women weavers. She asks, quote, "How many hours does a rug have? How many hours did a woman spend making it? How many hours was she paid for her work? What needs can she meet by selling her rugs?" She highlights the exploitation of workers, noting that women weavers are often crushed by a comfortable demand that shatters the unitary time of their lives, turning it into working hours torn out of existence itself. Despite these harsh conditions, she acknowledges that while some women overcome these circumstances, others are defeated by them. On the topic of art versus craft, Teresa has said, the woven textiles made by nomadic peoples transmit art and culture while also meeting basic needs. Haimas, or nomad tents, provide shelter for herders and their families. Rugs serve as both sleeping mats and flooring, protecting people from the winter cold. And handiras and hikes are mantles, as well as tribal and social symbols. In the Western world, utility is usually at odds with art, and this is the crucial part. But imposing limitations, such as the incompatibility of art with practical usage, contradicts the universality of art and its history, which shows us that means and functions have changed over the centuries. It is not unreasonable to deny the creativity of people who have little to spare and whose art contributes to their substance. Teresa has spent many years learning the technique from these Moroccan women, but also exploring how she can reinterpret these traditional Moroccan fabrics. From them, she configures a new artistic vocabulary and uses them as one way to reconsider traditional women's work, more broadly speaking. And like other artists of her time, such as Antonia Valero, Elena del Rio, Ana Laura Alaez, and Laura Torrado, to name some of the most influential Spanish artists, Teresa works with fabric, thread, and embroidery to unite all of these traditions and modernity. And you can see here a couple of examples of these Spanish artists. And then you can also see a blend of landscape and geometry, drawing inspiration from British op art here with Bridget Riley, who she has mentioned before, and also the work of anonymous art of Berber women. She mentioned that she moved from using horizontal and diagonal lines to incorporating triangles, which she describes as universal shapes immediately recognized as ornament. But I also wanted to show some of these more textiles that really were inspired by British op art. And this, again, was in an installation view from the recent exhibition in Valladolid. And these are details of the black and white diagonals, so you can get a little bit better sense of the texture as well. So here you can really see every sort of thread woven through. And here you can see a little bit of the light coming through to get see every detail. Now, Lanceta focuses on the Middle Atlas because of the three traditions. It emphasizes repetition the most and embodies a purely textile and traditional Moroccan language. In the Middle Atlas, two main techniques are used: knotwork for carpets and the flying weft technique for making tents, blankets, bags, and cushions. This flying weft technique is complex and precise and requires a long period of learning. It follows a programmed order and a rigid structure, sort of like a repetition of structures, and features motifs like stripes, triangles, and rhombuses, which you can start to see sort of being formed here. And here you see in one of her works from the late 80s called Ojos. This work, Ojos, which includes an original cushion woven by the communities near the Sahara in Morocco and two of Lanceta's own fabrics. Like her other works from this period, it combines anonymous creations with her own, forming a dialogue and a new compositional group. She explains that during these years, she maintained the technique, materials, and format of the original fabrics. Ojos utilizes the dynamism and movement of the rhombus, which is a figure with pronounced effects of irregularity, to explore repetition and variation. The rhombus has no horizons or verticals, but is made of diagonals that form unlimited plots, as she has said. She also stated in its repetitive expansion, the rhomboidal network does not reveal coordinates. It has no center or frame, but is a network of equal parts. Repetition is not an enemy, but a value that assumes variations and transgressions. The rhombus is a horizon. This is what she has said, that you can really see in this piece. Now, Teresa has stated that weaving has allowed, this is a quote, "Weaving has allowed me to understand a primordial and universal code that manifests its internal law, crossing physical, temporal, and cultural boundaries." And she mentioned this in a 2017 interview. She was not interested in the tapestries of palaces or lavish fabrics made by obedient hands under others' dictates, as we have seen. Here, for example, I think we can see two things working together. Her deep Catalan roots that might nod, even unconsciously, to the work of Juan Miró, another Catalan artist, and also the deep knowledge of the Middle Atlas traditions and symbols. I think we can read them, perhaps, as many have, as a landscape. And many of her works inspired by Morocco are considered landscapes, with this river in the middle, mountains, and other sort of natural features. In the most comprehensive exhibition of Teresa's work so far, Weaving as Open Source, it traces her artistic journey from the 70s to the present day. The exhibition also highlights Teresa's interest in collaborative work, engaging in dialogues with creative accomplices, such as some other Spanish artists. So what does Teresa mean by weaving as open source? Weaving is a binary code. It is warp and weft, which implies integrating an experience into an expanded conversation. Lanceta has said that, quote, "The act of weaving is continually renewed and expanded, thereby generating other stories, landscapes, and memories. The code is at the service of the collective, in which technique shows its importance. It is not about following the code, but about exploring its possibilities while integrating and broadening its limits." She further explains, "I'm interested in weaving as a technique, an ancestral technique that magnificently simplifies binary code, a system through which we recognize the world and shape our thoughts." So that's really what it is. Just remember weft and warp. Now, what about returning to the idea here of art and craft in her work, which is also for some still a very real division? The history of art versus craft debate is long and complicated, but for today, I'll note that Teresa is acutely aware that weavers have been considered artisans historically at best. Their work is often hidden, their weavings are seen as functional objects and not high art, but this is slowly changing. But in some cultures, there's no real distinction between art and craft, and traditions were often seen as non-innovative and therefore primitive. As we have seen throughout her career, Teresa is interested in formal exploration, but also in these traditional aspects of weaving. It's a unique form of creation that operates without preliminary drawing, developing figure and ground simultaneously. And through textiles, she has discovered a fundamental human source or code and connected that with different cultures and societies. Now, I'll finish by just mentioning that Teresa's work is currently being exhibited in other venues as well. There's a very important show traveling at the moment called Woven Histories, Textiles and Modern Abstraction. I believe it has already been at LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It's going to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, the National Gallery of Canada, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And this is curated by Lynn Cook, and you can see Teresa's pieces here, and here they are in the catalog. This is how they're exhibited, not the dress. So what is this exhibition about, and how does it incorporate Teresa's work? I think it really foregrounds a significant and overlooked strand in art history's modernist narratives. That's what the exhibition purports to do, by tracing how, when, and why abstract art intersected with woven textiles and pre-loom technologies like basketry, knotting, and netting over the past century. Now, before I get to that, I'll just finish by saying I think that Teresa's work, which you can see in this slide, stands out especially when we remember that she is not only an artist, but she also holds a doctorate in art history and works as a professor. So some of the richness in her work stems from her deep knowledge of both art and weaving, her understanding of action and culture, and her skill in a variety of communicative codes. And that's how I will end with Teresa. And I just want to, on a final note, say please come to the Meadows Museum this fall. We have some excellent exhibitions and programming planned. On the left, you'll see the legacy of Vesuvius, which explores the archaeological finds at Herculaneum and Pompeii, as well as the Spanish Bourbon presence in the Bay of Naples, which sponsored these digs of the Roman sites in the 18th century. And all of this is kind of under the shadow of the volcano of Vesuvius, which erupted famously in 79 AD bearing Pompeii and Herculaneum. But then later throughout the 18th and 17th centuries as well, when the Bourbon kings of Spain were present in Naples. And then Unearthing the Legacy of Islamic Spain is the exhibition that I am organizing. And this looks at how the 19th century really rediscovered, in a way, the medieval Islamic past, primarily through architecture, and then reinterpreted it for various social, political, and artistic means. So this exhibition will center around a 10th century capital, Umayyad capital from the city Medina al-Sahra. And then the rest of the works are photographs, etchings, prints, drawings, images of especially Granada, Cordoba, and Seville, these very important sites from Al-Andalus, and wrestling with the question at the time, how Islamic is Spain? So how were 19th century artists interpreting this question? How were they answering it? And this is from the perspective of Spanish and American and other European artists and authors. So please come in the fall, and I look forward to seeing all of you. Thank you.
I'll ask the first question to give a plug to the museum. How many El Grecos are at the Meadows?
There's one El Greco, but there are 3 Velázquez.
That was it.
And many Goyas as well. I think there are 5 or 6 paintings by Goya and many, many etchings.
Christina, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.